Ethan was the kind of man who liked silence more than noise. He lived alone in a small wooden house at the edge of a quiet town, where the nearest neighbor was half a mile away. His home sat beside an old creek that wound through the forest like a silver thread, its soft sound of running water filling the air all day and night. For most people, this kind of loneliness would feel heavy, but for Ethan, it was peace. He worked from home, fixing old radios, clocks, and other small machines people brought him. He was good at it. His hands were steady, his mind sharp, and he found comfort in small details. Every morning he would sit by his workbench with a cup of coffee, the window open to let in the sound of birds. Sometimes he wondered if this quiet life was all he'd ever have, but he never complained. He had seen enough of the busy world and had chosen peace instead. Behind his house, the creek ran through a thick line of trees, surrounded by tall grass and wildflowers. The place had always been special to him. When he was younger, he used to fish there with his father, but now it was where he went to think. Some evenings, after a long day, he would sit by the creek, skip a few stones, and watch the sky turn from gold to blue. He liked to think that the water had seen more of life than he ever would. Then one week, things began to feel different. It started with sounds. Late at night, while he was trying to sleep, he heard a faint humming, soft but steady, coming from somewhere near the trees. At first, he thought it was just insects or maybe the wind moving through the leaves, but it wasn't. The sound was too smooth, too constant. It was like something electrical, but there were no power lines anywhere near his house. The next night, the sound returned, this time closer. Ethan got up, went to his window, and peered outside. The forest looked normal, quiet still, but for a second he thought he saw a light flicker near the creek. It was dim and bluish, like a lantern shining underwater. He blinked and it vanished. He laughed to himself, shaking his head. "Probably just my eyes playing tricks," he whispered. He didn't think much of it and went back to bed. But the next morning, when he went outside to feed the birds and check his garden, he noticed something odd. His toolbox, which he kept near the shed, was open. He was sure he had closed it. A few of his tools were missing, mostly small ones like screwdrivers and pliers. He looked around, expecting to see footprints or signs of an animal, but the ground was untouched. Everything was clean, too clean. He decided maybe kids had sneaked in as a prank, though he couldn't imagine why anyone would walk this far just to take tools. As the days passed, little things kept happening. The humming continued every few nights, always faint but somehow moving, sometimes near the water, sometimes right behind his fence. His dog, Max, used to bark at night, but now he only whimpered and refused to go near the back trees. The air around the creek began to feel different too, cooler, sharper, as if something invisible was moving through it. Ethan told himself not to overthink it. He didn't believe in ghosts or strange beings. He was a practical man, but a part of him deep inside began to feel curious. One evening, he sat on his porch with a flashlight and just listened. The crickets were singing, the water was flowing, and the moonlight made everything silver. For a while, it was peaceful again. Then, just when he began to relax, he heard something new, a faint splash. It wasn't the usual sound of water hitting rocks. It was softer, like footsteps. Ethan turned off his flashlight and waited. The air was still. A minute passed. 2. Then he heard it again. Slow, careful movements in the creek behind his house. He stood up quietly, trying not to make a sound, and took a few steps toward the trees. The sound stopped. He waited again. Only silence. He felt a chill crawl up his arms but didn't back away. He stayed there for several minutes before finally shaking his head and going back inside. That night he couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the water, the missing tools, the lights. What could possibly be there? His logical side said it was nothing, just nature. But another part of him, the part that had always believed the universe held more secrets than humans could explain, whispered something else. The next morning, he decided to check the creek in daylight. The forest was fresh with dew, the air cool and clean. He followed the small path behind his garden and reached the stream. Everything looked normal. The water sparkled under the sun, and birds were hopping between the branches. But as he looked closer, he noticed marks on the rocks near the edge, smooth prints like the shape of a foot, but too thin, too elegant, and unlike any animal's. He knelt down and touched one. It was cold, as if the rock itself had been frozen. For a moment he just stared at the creek, wondering if he should be worried, but instead of fear something else filled him, curiosity. The world had always seemed ordinary to him, predictable and calm. But now, something felt alive, something beyond understanding. That evening, he sat by the water again, watching the reflection of the setting sun. The humming didn't come that night, but he could feel something watching him from far away, something quiet and patient. Ethan didn't know it yet, but his simple life was about to change. The strange sounds, the missing tools, the glowing water, all of it was leading to a moment he would never forget. Behind his small house in that peaceful creek, a story beyond human imagination was waiting to begin. The next evening came quietly, covered in a cool mist that rolled down from the hills. The air smelled of wet earth and pine. Ethan sat near his window with a cup of tea, staring at the trees behind his house. The strange events of the last few days kept circling his thoughts. He tried to tell himself it was all nothing, just tricks of light, animals, or his own tired mind. But the more he thought about it, the more his heart whispered that something unusual was happening. By the time the clock struck 9, the forest was dark. The sound of the creek flowed steadily like a quiet song. Ethan felt a strange pull, an urge to walk outside and see the water again. He grabbed his flashlight and stepped out into the cool air. The night was silent except for the soft hum of insects. The grass beneath his feet was damp. He followed the small dirt path that led behind his garden, pushing aside low branches as he walked toward the creek. The moon was half hidden by clouds, giving the forest a pale, ghostly glow. When he reached the water, he turned off his flashlight and just stood there for a moment. The scene looked peaceful, too peaceful. Then he noticed something. The water ahead shimmered faintly as if something was moving beneath the surface. His breath caught. He leaned forward slightly, trying to see. That was when he saw her. At first, she seemed like a dream. A slender figure stood in the shallow part of the creek, the water reaching just below her knees. Her back was turned to him. Her hair, long and silvery, hung wet down her shoulders, catching bits of moonlight like strands of metal. She moved with a kind of quiet grace, her hands brushing lightly through the water. Ethan froze, unsure of what he was seeing. His mind raced through explanations. A traveler, a lost hiker, someone from the nearby village maybe. But something about her didn't fit. Her movements were too fluid, too calm. The air around her seemed to shimmer slightly, as if reality itself bent where she stood. He took a careful step closer, his shoes sinking slightly into the damp earth. The sound made her pause. Slowly she turned her head. That single moment felt endless. The moonlight fell across her face, and Ethan's heart nearly stopped. Her features were delicate but unlike any human's. Her skin had a soft, pale tone with faint lines that glowed like silver veins under her skin. Her eyes were large and luminous, carrying a color he couldn't describe, somewhere between blue, green, and light gold. But more than her strange beauty, it was the feeling her gaze gave him. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It was calm. Almost sad, Ethan didn't move. He didn't even breathe. His mind told him to run, but his heart said to stay. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke or moved. Only the sound of water and the whisper of wind filled the space between them. Then, as suddenly as she appeared, she stepped back into the deeper part of the creek. The mist rose around her, swallowing her outline. Ethan blinked and she was gone, vanished into the fog as if she had never been there. The water rippled once, then became still. Ethan stood there for a long time, trying to understand what had just happened. His flashlight hung loosely in his hand. He wanted to believe it was a trick of light, but deep inside he knew it wasn't. What he saw was real. He could still feel it. The weight of her eyes, the quiet sadness in her expression. When he finally turned back toward his house, the forest seemed different. Every sound felt louder, every shadow deeper. Yet strangely, he didn't feel afraid. He felt awake. That night he couldn't sleep. He sat by his window, staring at the trees. The memory of her face replayed in his mind again and again. He noticed small details, the gentle tilt of her head, the way her hair floated slightly as if carried by a breeze that wasn't there. He thought about her expression, that strange look of calm mixed with something unspoken. When morning came, Ethan walked to the creek again, half hoping it had all been a dream. But the signs were still there. The rocks near the water were wet where she had stood. The surface rippled gently as though remembering her presence. And then he saw something that made his heart beat faster. A small piece of cloth caught between two branches near the bank. He picked it up carefully. It wasn't like any fabric he had seen before. It was thin as a spider's thread, but strong when he pulled on it. It shimmered faintly under the sunlight. He turned it in his hands, wondering what kind of material it was. Was it possible she had dropped it? Ethan felt a strange mix of excitement and confusion. He knew he should probably tell someone, maybe the local police or a friend in town, but he didn't. Something told him this wasn't something people would understand. They would laugh or call him crazy. So he decided to keep it to himself. As the day went on, his thoughts kept returning to the same moment, the way she looked at him. There had been no fear in her eyes, only curiosity, and somehow it felt like she recognized him, like she had been there before. When night came again, Ethan went back to the creek, hoping, without fully admitting it, that he would see her again. But the water was quiet. Only the moonlight and the soft sound of crickets filled the air. He waited for hours but saw nothing, yet deep in his heart he knew this wasn't over. Something had started. Something that would not let him rest until he understood who or what she was. He didn't know it then, but that single look, that one silent encounter, had already changed him. The man who once loved his quiet, simple life now felt a restless spark inside him. The forest no longer seemed ordinary, and the creek was no longer just a part of his backyard. He felt as if the world had opened a hidden door before him, one that showed how little humans really knew about what lived beyond their sight. And somewhere out there, in the soft glow of the moonlit creek, the mysterious woman with the silver hair might still be watching him, just as quietly, just as curiously, as he thought about her. That thought stayed with him all night, and even when he finally drifted into sleep, the sound of the creek followed him like a song that refused to fade away. The days after that strange night passed slowly, like time itself had changed its rhythm. Ethan tried to go back to his normal routine, fixing radios, repairing clocks, cleaning his small workshop, but his mind refused to stay still. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face again. Those eyes that looked deep into his soul, that calm sadness that made him feel both comforted and lost. He told himself to forget it, to move on. But he couldn't. Something inside him had shifted. The world felt different now, like there was a quiet secret hidden beneath everything he thought he knew. Even the air outside his house seemed to hum softly when he walked near the creek, as if the place remembered her presence. One morning, he decided to take a walk down the creek again. The sky was cloudy and the forest smelled of rain. As he reached the water, he noticed something strange. The rocks near the bank had faint marks on them, smooth and curving like footprints, but not human. They were slender and delicate, shaped almost like leaves pressed into the stone. He crouched down to touch one. The moment his fingers brushed the surface, he felt a small vibration, a kind of warmth that quickly faded. Ethan stood there, heart beating fast. He looked around, but no one was there. The forest was silent except for the sound of the moving water. He looked up at the trees, half expecting her to appear again, but the mist only thickened. That evening, he sat by his kitchen window with a notebook, sketching the marks he'd seen. He wasn't an artist, but he wanted to remember them. Then an idea came to him, something half practical, half foolish. What if he tried to leave something for her? Not to trap her, not to scare her, but to show kindness. The next day, he packed a small basket with a blanket, some food, and a tiny flashlight. He walked to the creek just as the sun was setting, the orange light spilling over the trees. He placed the basket near the edge of the water and stepped back, feeling both nervous and hopeful. "This is crazy," he muttered under his breath. "I'm leaving food for someone who might not even exist." But deep inside, he didn't believe that. He knew she was real. That night, he stayed awake longer than usual. He kept glancing out the window, half expecting to see a shadow move near the trees. When he finally fell asleep, his dreams were filled with the sound of running water and the shimmer of silver hair. The next morning, he rushed outside. The basket was gone. Every single thing inside it had disappeared. The only thing left behind was a small, crystal-like stone lying where the blanket had been. It was no bigger than a coin, smooth and glowing faintly even in daylight. Ethan picked it up carefully. It felt warm, almost alive, and when he held it close to his ear, he thought he could hear a faint hum, like the same sound that had echoed in the nights before. He didn't know what it was, but he knew one thing for sure. It was her way of answering him. She understood. The thought filled his heart with quiet excitement. He placed the crystal on his desk and stared at it for a long time. The glow was soft but constant, a gentle pulse of light that made him feel calm whenever he looked at it. Later that day, Ethan decided to take another step. He wanted to know more about her, to see her again, even if only from a distance. He wasn't sure if it was curiosity or something deeper that pulled him toward the creek again and again. He spent the next 2 nights setting up a small camera near the water, hidden under leaves and stones. He didn't want to spy on her in a bad way. He just wanted proof that he wasn't imagining things. If he could see her once more, even on video, maybe it would help him understand what was happening. When everything was ready, he went back to his house and waited. The first night, nothing happened. The camera recorded only the quiet flow of the creek and the rustling of trees. But on the second night, something changed. It was around midnight when the humming sound returned. Ethan sat up in bed, his heart racing. He went to the window and saw a faint blue light moving through the trees, just like before. He wanted to go outside, but stopped himself. Instead, he waited until morning to check the camera. When he finally opened the recording, his hands trembled slightly. The footage showed the creek under the soft moonlight, empty at first. Then out of the fog, a faint figure appeared. It was her. She stepped gracefully onto the shallow stones, the same calmness in her every move. The light of the moon touched her skin, making it shimmer faintly. She looked around for a moment, then knelt near the water and touched the surface with her hands. Small ripples of light spread out, glowing softly like living threads. Ethan's eyes widened. He could hardly believe what he was seeing. Then suddenly she turned her head directly toward the camera. For a few seconds she looked straight into the lens. There was no anger or fear in her eyes, only quiet curiosity. Slowly she reached out her hand and touched the camera. The screen filled with light and the recording ended. Ethan leaned back in his chair, stunned. He stared at the blank screen, unable to move. She had seen the camera. She had seen him. He sat there for hours, thinking. He realized she wasn't just passing through. She knew he was there. She understood he was watching. And instead of hiding, she had answered. Later that night, when Ethan walked outside, the air felt different again. He stood near the trees, the crystal in his hand. The creek shimmered faintly in the moonlight. He felt as if she was somewhere close, watching him just as quietly as he had watched her. He didn't know what she wanted, or why she had come here, but something inside him whispered that their paths were now connected. The small, quiet life he once knew was gone. In its place was something larger, mysterious, beautiful, and impossible to explain. Ethan looked up at the sky, the stars twinkling faintly behind thin clouds. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. He felt like he had become part of something much greater than himself, something he didn't understand yet, but wanted to. And as the wind moved through the trees, carrying the soft sound of the creek, Ethan could almost hear her voice in it. Not words, just a feeling. A promise that this was only the beginning. The night after watching the recording, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about what he had seen. The image of her turning toward the camera stayed with him. Those eyes, bright and calm, felt like they were still watching him even when the screen had gone black. He didn't feel fear. What he felt was something deeper, something that touched a quiet place in his heart that had been asleep for years. He sat at his desk, staring at the glowing crystal she had left him. It pulsed gently in the dark room, the light moving like a soft heartbeat. Every time he looked at it, he felt peace wash over him. But that peace was mixed with questions he couldn't answer. Who was she? Where did she come from? Why had she appeared behind his house, of all places? The world outside felt still. The moonlight spilled across the floor, painting pale patterns on the wooden boards. Ethan stood up, grabbed his jacket, and stepped outside. The cool air touched his face. The sound of the creek drifted toward him, familiar and comforting. As he walked down the path, the forest seemed alive in a new way. The branches above him swayed gently, even though there was no wind. The shadows of the leaves danced softly across the ground. He reached the edge of the creek and stood there, the flashlight in his hand, though he didn't turn it on. The moon gave enough light to see. For a few minutes he saw nothing unusual, only the calm water, the mist floating low, and the reflection of the stars. Then, as if responding to his thoughts, the air changed. A soft sound like the hum of distant music filled the night. The surface of the creek rippled slightly. Ethan held his breath. From the fog on the other side of the water, she appeared again. The same figure he had seen before, graceful, calm, and glowing faintly under the moonlight. She stepped forward slowly, her feet barely making a sound on the stones. The water seemed to move aside for her as if it respected her presence. Ethan didn't move. He was afraid that one step, one sudden sound might make her disappear again. She stopped near the middle of the creek and looked at him. Their eyes met across the water. Her gaze was clear, curious, and filled with something he couldn't name, something human yet not human at all. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The night held its breath. Then, to his surprise, she smiled, just a small, gentle smile. It wasn't the kind of smile one gives a stranger. It felt like she had known him for years. Ethan took a slow step forward. His voice came out soft, trembling slightly. "Who are you?" She tilted her head as if she understood the question but couldn't answer it. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Instead, a faint light shimmered from her hands, flowing through the air like dust in sunlight. The glow reached the water, and for a moment, the whole creek lit up in silver ripples. Ethan's eyes widened. He didn't understand what she was doing, but he could feel what she meant. The light carried warmth, peace, and a strange sense of connection. It was as if she was trying to speak through feeling, not words. Then, as quickly as it came, the light faded. The water returned to its quiet flow. She took one more step closer to him, so close now that he could see the delicate patterns on her skin like tiny waves or stars. Ethan whispered, "Are you real?" Her eyes softened, and she reached out her hand slightly as if to answer him. But before he could move closer, the wind shifted. A sudden bright flash cut through the forest like lightning without thunder. The light reflected in her eyes, and in an instant, her calm expression turned to something else. Alarm, maybe even sadness. Ethan blinked, and she was gone. Just like that. The space she had stood in was empty again, the water rippling as if stirred by invisible hands. He looked around, calling softly, "Wait. Please don't go." Only silence answered. He stayed there for a long time, staring at the place where she had been. His heart ached with a strange emptiness, the kind that comes when something beautiful slips away before you can understand it. When he finally went back to his house, the night felt heavier. He sat on his porch thinking about the flash he'd seen. It wasn't lightning. It had felt too precise, too controlled. He began to wonder if she had been running from something. Later that night, as he sat in front of his computer, he noticed something strange on his desk. The crystal, the one she had left, was glowing brighter than before. He leaned in, staring at it. For a brief second, he thought he saw something inside it, a faint shape like a reflection of her face. Then it faded. Ethan touched the stone gently. "You're trying to tell me something, aren't you?" He whispered. The crystal pulsed once, as if answering. He didn't know how or why, but he felt a strong sense that she was in trouble, that something beyond his understanding had reached this quiet corner of Earth, and that he was somehow part of it now. That thought stayed with him until dawn. He barely slept. Every sound outside made him look up, hoping, waiting. When the first light of morning touched the trees, he walked out to the creek again. The forest was quiet. The water flowed gently, but the air felt different, heavier, as if carrying a hidden tension. He crouched near the edge and placed the crystal beside the water. "If you can hear me," he said softly, "I'm not afraid of you. I just want to understand." The water shimmered faintly, then settled again. No sound, no light, just peace. But deep inside, Ethan felt something he couldn't explain. It was a quiet certainty. A bond had formed. He knew she wasn't gone forever. She had shown herself to him for a reason, and as he stood there, watching the sunlight break through the trees, Ethan realized that the world he thought he knew was much larger, more mysterious, and more connected than he had ever imagined. He turned back toward his house, unaware that the next night would change everything once again, that she would return not through the water this time, but standing silently at the edge of his backyard waiting for him. The night after the strange flash, Ethan felt an unshakable restlessness. Every sound outside his house made him turn his head. The forest no longer felt distant or silent. It felt alive, like it was waiting for something to happen. The crystal on his desk still glowed faintly, its soft pulse reminding him that she was real, that she had once stood in the water under the moonlight. He tried to read, to work, even to sleep, but his thoughts kept returning to her face, the kindness in her eyes, the calm in her movements, the sadness that had filled the air when she vanished. He didn't know what she was, where she came from, or why she had appeared near his home, but he knew one thing. She was not a dream. As the clock neared midnight, he felt drawn toward the back door again. He opened it slowly and stepped into the cool night. The air was still. The sound of the creek floated softly through the trees. A thin layer of fog hugged the ground, making everything look like a scene from another world. He stood there for a long moment, breathing in the silence. Then, just when he thought he had imagined it all, a faint light shimmered near the edge of his yard. His heart began to race. The light grew clearer, forming a shape, a figure standing under the old oak tree. It was her. She stood still, her silver hair catching the moonlight, her eyes bright and calm. The same peaceful presence washed over him, stronger now, like warmth spreading through the cold night. Ethan took a slow step forward. "You came back," he whispered, barely trusting his own voice. She tilted her head slightly, the faintest smile on her lips. Her hands rested by her sides, and though she didn't speak, Ethan felt her meaning. She hadn't left him, she had been waiting for the right time to return. He walked closer, careful not to move too fast. The air around her shimmered softly, like light bending in water. For a moment, the two of them just looked at each other. There was no fear, no confusion, just a quiet connection that felt deeper than words. Ethan wanted to ask her everything, where she was from, why she was here, but when he looked into her eyes, he knew he didn't need to. He could feel her story. She wasn't from his world. She had come from somewhere far beyond the stars, a place where silence wasn't empty but alive with meaning. She wasn't here to harm anyone. She was searching for something, perhaps peace, perhaps understanding. Slowly, she raised her hand and gestured toward the sky. Ethan followed her gaze. The stars seemed brighter tonight, clearer, as if the whole universe was leaning closer to listen. Then he saw it, a faint line of light moving across the sky, not like a plane or a shooting star, but steady, controlled. It disappeared behind the clouds within seconds. When Ethan looked back at her, he saw that same quiet sadness in her eyes again. He realized then that she might not be able to stay. Whatever had brought her here was calling her back. He took another step closer, his voice soft. "Do you have to go?" She didn't answer, but her eyes said enough. The light around her shimmered again, brighter this time. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. He didn't want her to leave. He didn't even know why it hurt so much. How could someone he'd met only through silence mean so much? But deep inside, he knew that her presence had changed him. Before she turned to go, she reached out her hand. Ethan hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward and placing his hand near hers. They didn't touch completely, there was a faint space of air between them. But in that space, a warm light spread soft and gentle. For an instant, Ethan saw things, images, feelings, moments that weren't his own. He saw wide open skies of a color he couldn't name, waters that shone like silver glass, and cities made of light, silent and peaceful. Then he saw her, standing alone on a cliff watching the stars fade. It wasn't loneliness he felt from her. It was longing. When the vision faded, she looked at him one last time, her eyes full of gratitude and quiet sorrow. The light around her began to rise, flowing upward like mist caught in wind. Ethan whispered, "Thank you for showing me." The light grew brighter, surrounding her completely. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it lifted into the air and vanished into the night sky. The forest went still again. The only sound left was the soft murmur of the creek. Ethan stood there for a long time, staring at the sky. He didn't cry. He didn't move. He simply stood in the cool night air, feeling both the weight of loss and the strange peace that followed it. When morning came, he found the crystal lying in the grass where she had stood. It no longer glowed, but when he picked it up, he felt a faint warmth inside it, like a heartbeat that had slowed but never truly stopped. He took it inside and placed it on his windowsill, where the sunlight could touch it. Days turned into weeks. The lights never returned, and the forest went back to its quiet rhythm. People in town asked why he looked different these days, calmer, more thoughtful, But Ethan never told them what had happened. It wasn't a story anyone would believe, and it wasn't something he wanted to prove. It was something he wanted to protect. Sometimes at night he would walk to the creek again. The water would flow just as it always had, but he could still feel her presence there, the quiet peace in the air, the soft hum of something unseen. It wasn't a haunting feeling. It was like being watched over gently and kindly. He had changed. He saw the world differently now. Every sound, every breeze, every shimmer of light felt meaningful. He no longer thought of himself as a man living alone in the forest. He was part of something larger, something that stretched far beyond the sky, into places he might never reach but could still feel. One evening, as he sat by the creek, the setting sun turned the water golden. He took the crystal from his pocket and held it up. For a brief second, it caught the light and flickered softly just once, like a quiet goodbye or maybe a promise. Ethan smiled, whispering, "I won't forget." The creek flowed gently on, the forest peaceful around him. Life continued, but Ethan carried that memory inside him always. The night he saw an alien woman in the water, the night her face changed him forever. And though she was gone, the world no longer felt empty. Because once you've looked into the eyes of something greater than yourself, you can never see life the same way again.